All right, I'll kick it off. Hello and welcome to the panel for the curators and artists of Parallels and Peripheries, Practice and Presence. We're really excited about this show, which is up through March 7th at the Academy, on view through appointment. You can make an appointment on our website, which is nyaa.edu. And if you can't make it to New York, it is also available as a virtual tour on our website, and you can stroll through and see all the artworks in place, and there's also a digital catalog. Tonight's talk is also being recorded and is available on our YouTube channel. Let me introduce the curators first, who will be hosting. Larry Ossei-Mensah, who is joining us from a log cabin, is the former senior curator at MoCAD in Detroit. He has been profiled in the New York Times, Culture Magazine, and ArtNet, among others. He is currently a curator at large at the Brooklyn Academy of Music and is also a founder of Art Noir, a nonprofit that strives for the diversification of the creative class. Robin Gibson is the assistant curator. She is a painter and ceramicist who is also an alumna of the New York Academy of Arts Masters of Fine Arts program. She graduated in 2018, and in addition to being the assistant curator, she is also an artist in the show. Tonight, we are thrilled to be joined by 4 artists featured in the show. Eddie Arroyo is a Miami-based painter whose work examines gentrification through landscape paintings. He gained significant attention for his work at the 2019 Whitney Biennial, and he is represented by Spinello Projects. Jean Shin, who is coming to us live from inside her installation, is an installation artist who uses small everyday objects, especially scavenged materials, to create monumental sculptures and site-specific installations. She has been the subject of solo exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian, among others. Stephen Johnson is a graduate of the New York Academy of Arts MFA program from the class of 2017. He is a draftsman and was recently a fellow at the Royal Academy of Drawing in London. His work was shown this fall at the Oculus in New York through the Lower Manhattan Community Council. Paul Anthony Smith is a native of Jamaica whose work examines identity within the African diaspora, especially the post-colonial Caribbean and its people. He is a painter and also works in the unusual medium of picotage, in which a sharp tool is used to prick the surface of a photograph, altering the image. He is represented by Jack Shainman Gallery. So during the talk, we would love to get your questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, Larry.
Cool, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the Academy, the artists. It's been a joy to work on this project. It's been a little different for me. I think this might be the first exhibition I've curated at a, I guess, school or an academy. And so I think when Robin and I were kind of talking through the themes and the ideas, in my mind, I was always thinking about the primary audience is going to be students, art students, MFA students. And I think, Robin, I think it'll be great for you to kind of share insights from the text that you wrote that really kind of sets the foundation for this exhibition as an alumni and I guess documenting the challenges, the frustrations, the opportunities, just to kind of give people a little bit more context as to how this exhibition was birthed.
Right. So originally, the whole idea for the exhibition came during a time of like contemplation and frustration, thinking about what was going on with the the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. With I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so Breonna Taylor, that whole thing that happened there was, I didn't know her personally, but feeling all of that, knowing that I couldn't be home at that time to even be in the community, kind of, did something to me. And it got me thinking about, art and activism and what that means and what it means to, be an activist and an artist. And I just started thinking about my own, time at the Academy and what that looked like for me. And for me, I was the only Black person in my class. And so that did a number on me as far as, you know, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? How do I navigate this world that I'm in? I do have colleagues that, you know, we're all in the same boat. We're all in, you know, our first year of grad school trying to figure things out. But at the same time, I had like another layer of experience that nobody else had. And it took me a while to kind of get my bearings. And one of the things that I wrote about in the proposal and in the writing that was shared in the exhibition is, you know, learning how to create my own space and my own community and carve out that space. And actually, Stephen Johnson, who's on here with us, was one of those people who reached out to me and made sure that I knew that I was part of a community at the academy. And so that kind of got me into that mindset of, you know, if there's not something for me here, then I can create something. You know, I can reach out to other artists of color, Black artists like me who have come in and tried to, you know, foster a community. And so I was really thinking about that as I wrote the proposal and, you know, what would it look like if we had artists of color who, you know, past, present, and, you know, thinking about who would come in to the academy at that point, and what would it look like to have a show where it's our work and we're talking about our experience, where we're talking about just the things that we feel, the things that might go unnoticed or the things that might get passed by. And because there was times where I felt very much, you know, invisible. And so how could I use then this show to make other people feel visible, whether they're current students, whether they're alumni, whether they're students who are even just thinking about coming to the academy. So really that's where all of this kind of was birthed out of, you know, all of these different ideas kind of coming together into this one thing, and the excitement of what it would be like to see us as a group, our work in conversation, because we all work in different ways. You know, we're not a monolith. So what does each person's work look like? What is everybody talking about? Because not everybody's talking about just their identity, but, you know, how are they in turn talking about their identity, if that is what they're talking about? So I just wanted to kind of see all of those different things coming together.
Thank you, Robin. And I think that last point that you make is very important. And I think we made a conscious effort to collaborate with artists who work in a multitude of different ways to highlight different concerns. So whether it's like Eddie, you know, and his paintings, thinking about the landscape, thinking about gentrification, but then also thinking about specifically, you know, events that occurred last year that still, I think, is etched in many of our minds. Thinking about Jean's installation. And I remember, you know, Metacloud and seeing the images of it. And I was like, this is perfect, you know, because I think I've been a friend of the Academy for a number of years. And I think there's this belief that, you know, you can only be a painter or a sculptor traditionally. And what I love about Jean's practice is that, you know, when I first saw Jean's work, I think it was in sculpture with forks or spoons or something like that. I was like, what the fuck is this? And it was just really interesting how you've been able to just take these very familiar materials and just transform them into something incredible. And so I guess I'd be interested to hear from everybody briefly, you know, why did you say yes to participating in this show? I'm sure you get many invitations to be in group shows. And then I think we'll do like a quick round robin for the guests who are here so they can see what the work that is included in the show. And then I think we'll just kind of move from there. So I guess, Eddie, you're first in the box. So we've talked on the phone and I shared my thoughts of what I was aiming for, and you shared yours. So I guess, why did you say yes to the invitation? What was it about either the prompts or the opportunity to kind of re-engage the academy, or just institution in general that, resonated with you?
Well, let me start off by answering that question with a quote that I saw from a lecture that was in the AA School of Architecture in London back in October 15th, 1998 by Adrian Forty. And he said, at the moment when these objects are made and revealed, they are allowed a momentary confirmation of what everybody knows, but actually no one needs to talk about. And that was in reference to a book that he had yet to publish, which was published a year afterwards, called The Art of Forgetting, Materializing Culture. He wrote it with Suzanne Kuchler, and she was a German anthropologist, and Adrian Ford is a professor of architectural history. So when 2021 came around and I was approached in the end of 2020 to talk about, or to be invited to exhibit, at the time, which was part of the zeitgeist at the moment, was everybody wanted to forget 2020. And I thought that was such an interesting impulse for a collective impulse for everyone to just have this need to forget what they just went through. And it speaks to the psychological aspect of 2020. And I was also thinking about actually really proposing the paintings that I was grateful for that got accepted into the show, which is
I'm gonna quickly share my screen. Keep talking so that people can see it.
Of course. And so I was thinking about essentially, because I was doing a series of work during the summer of last year, and all I could think about when I was doing the proposal and how I was going to frame it is just thinking about what happened after George Floyd and how not just this country, but the world responded to it. So that painting you just showed was, well, this one is in Brooklyn in Bushwick, from what I understand, because I got this image off of Instagram. I was following this activist organization or group that is called Mi Casa No Es Su Casa, set in Bushwick, Brooklyn, but they changed their name recently to Mi Casa Resiste. And I thought it was a very compelling image. And it took me like 2 days, no, actually it took me a day to complete, a couple of hours really. But it took me a couple of days to really think about whether I wanted to paint it or not. And I just decided to just do it, and I posted it immediately and tagged everyone. I found out through about the activist group when I was at the Whitney, when I decided to join up with Decolonize This Place and call for the removal of Warren B. Kanders, who at the time was in charge of a company that provided tear gas for military and law enforcement, which is pretty much synonymous these days. And so the second image that you showed, that one is located in the design district, which is 3 blocks away from my house. And it's basically a luxury area. And they boarded up their storefronts, which I noticed that following the news that there was happening in not just storefronts in New York, but also in museums as well. So I thought it was also an interesting, including the Whitney. It was also an interesting impulse, much like the impulse to forget 2020. And so most of this is just reiterating the quote I stated is remembering is only possible on the basis of forgetting. So it's this impulse to just basically select what to forget and how that process takes place. A lot of the lecture that he gave at the AA School of Architecture was in relation to different parts of the different civilizations in the world, but mostly in Germany. So during that time in history, there was this negotiating of structural spaces and what it means to a city, you know, like the city as part of the collective memory of its people. Mm-hmm. is basically what he was alluding to in the lecture. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was very much did inform my decision to participate in the show.
Dope. Thank you. Jean, Professor Jean, I'll pull up your piece, Metacloud.
Yeah, it's so great to mention the Metacloud piece. This one actually, Larry, is
it's an iteration.
It's a different iteration. So Metacloud was shown at the Pioneer Works a while back, and it was specifically addressing the collection of slides from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it was their slide archive, and really talking about the institutional history when an institution decides they don't need their slides anymore because everything's gone, quote, digital. And I really wanted to imagine, like, oh, where did these images go, like sort of in the cloud? So it was creating this kind of physicality now that we're working digitally instead of the analog technology. And then this iteration was after I did that project. I was thinking in terms of the carousel and lanterns and how for most of us, art history is taught through the slide projection, and how these other collections exist that were being dismantled and disregarded as well. And so I got this from Materials for the Arts, which was also the first donation. And institutions were, again, getting rid of their entire slide lecture series. And so I thought, oh, it wouldn't be really interesting, unlike the Met's specific collection in history, here I'm literally walking through the Jansons, you know, the canon of art history. And although certain professors might really be able to have very specific slide lectures, most of them are lecturing through that experience of the canon. And I felt so much that we needed to not only update this technology, but also update what the images of art history that we teach are. So maybe
there was one that you created. There's a new one.
Oh yeah. So when you had asked me about the inclusion of this work, well, first I thought it was exciting to imagine at the Academy, right, where we think in terms of tradition and masters, mastery. I really wanted to kind of question that by turning the gaze onto, well, who is a master? You know, who is included and who is left out, and really trying to center that voice and the people who were lacking in these images. So I really appreciated your curatorial premise and thought this was a perfect way to talk about how I, as a young student, of course, looking at this history, falling in love with art, having art in all my life, then feeling like I'm not represented here. My people aren't represented here. And if they are, they're sort of sent off in a different carousel, in a different geographical and historical lens, seen with anonymous, you know, often men, you know, so it really did seem like they were othered. And so I really appreciated the premise of the show, trying to bring that center. And so I included one of my own slides that I had from like 2000 up to right when slide technology stopped around 2005. So it was really nice to revisit my own history of my own early works, you know, when I was working with socks and clothes, you know, all these other materials of accumulation, and put those carousels together. It was like an old slide lecture that would never be shown, right? Except physically shown, you know, in these little tiny 35 millimeters.
And
Yeah.
so how does that, because you teach at Pratt, so you teach in an institution, how does this understanding shape how you build your curriculum and fill in those gaps, what you center and what you kind of decenter?
Right. Well, I think questioning art history is really great, and questioning how and why we know of this story. But also, we've been talking of course, a lot about inclusion. But what does inclusion look like? Is it the token representation where you just lump everyone else in a group, together for one highlight? Or do you really talk about the history, saying, where did these influences come from? And many of them came from Africa. Many of them came from Asia. That's where, when we want to decolonize that history, a lot of the early inspirations were deep and historical, and then Western, usually male European, really stole from a lot of these practices and these visions and then made it their own, right? And we don't talk about that. We don't talk about those influences. We just start as if genius, master. We need to really colonize those words and really examine, where does art history really start? So I do think in my own teaching, it's really trying to bring in this multitude of voices that we talk about, and centering that, and how you might show an example of Western art that is iconic and of course amazing to look at, but then let's reference what they're referencing or what happened parallel, that are happening in different countries, and not just the first world class, but many countries around the world. So yeah, it's been really nice to imagine the slide carousel as a learning tool, as a place of distribution. And also, so how can we dismantle some of those efficiencies, right? And complicate those narratives, but also in terms of this idea of amplification. I think projections is that little tiny slide, can fill up a whole room and project, right? And I feel like that's what we need to do, as people of color. I think, our voices need to be amplified.
And I think that's what when Robin and I were thinking through, where do we put your piece? I think we both looked at each other and were just like, the center, because knowing that, I believe Castle is also used for seminars. So like so students it'll be part of their routine, and hopefully inviting them to ask questions about things that we kind of just consider to be, fact, and not really questioning where did these facts come from, And so I'm excited to hear the feedback from students who engage with your work. So thank you. Stephen, you have the most intimate piece in the show.
Yes, very, very tiny.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull it up so we can see this piece. Where is it? Okay, cool.
So where do I begin? In sort of like a similar sort of content in between Eddie and Jean, this past year has been a really sort of an existential shift and sort of like recalibrating how I have been interfacing and sort of coming online with my sort of like mortality and Blackness and my understanding of like how those two things intersect. I was in a residency in London at the very beginning of 2020 that got interrupted because of the pandemic. And it was the first time that I had traveled abroad by myself. I was in London, and it's like my first big sort of art excursion period for me. So super exciting. I was super enthusiastic to get out there and paint London red with my drawings. And one of the first things that became very apparent to me is as I was meeting people and exchanging experiences and things, I was meeting other people of color who live in a sort of other context that is outside of America, and having those really sort of strong, in-depth conversations that kind of really sort of smacked me in the face. You know, living in the States, you have this very sort of myopic feel of like, what is it to be a person of color? And then the second that you leave the country, that is completely blown out of the water in ways and magnitudes that I couldn't even really put into words. So it really became important for me to catalog those things and to really give myself a history of them. I get back from London, you know, sort of extremely discombobulated because everything shut down. I basically, within the course of, what was it, like 5 days, classes stopped, or the residency stopped at the Royal Drawing School, and then the State Department declares level 4, so I have to get out. So I have to take the first flight out, and I'm just like, ah. And I get back home, and in 2 to 3 weeks, the George Floyd's murder happened. And it was such I felt like I left my body on more than one occasion. And I had never processed what happened with Freddie Gray in Baltimore in 2015. And I wasn't directly a part of the demonstrations and the marches, but I protested directly afterwards. And when it happened, I was working, and I was about to graduate from undergrad, and I was just like, I just have to process. I just have to keep moving. I can't really give into this, or else it's going to make me crumble. But all of that was re-torn afresh again as soon as I got home from London. Lockdown, pandemic, everything's happening. And my mother had given me, right before I left, she had given me a couple photos and things that were owned by my late grandmother and uncle, who had passed relatively close to one another. And they had a lot of photos from my childhood. And that's where some of the source imagery comes from the show, the piece that's in the show. I was at a birthday party with my cousin Jadea, who's 2 days younger than me. And sort of having that existential crisis and trying to reattach myself and recenter myself through this sort of source material that I had gotten from my family and stories. I did a lot of talking over Zoom with my family, and my mother, missing my grandmother, really recounting a lot of the stories, basically getting cross-referenced and talking to family, and trying to deal with all that, and then deal with learning that being a person of color is completely different from, regardless of where you are, that context is different, and trying to really process all of that because I had nothing else to distract me being stuck in the house. So that's where all those things together made this series of very, very tiny, intimate drawings, because I felt like I could only handle it in small, bite-sized pieces.
How many drawings are in the series?
There are 6 currently of the very smaller ones, and they've basically generated a couple of others that are now getting slightly bigger and bigger and bigger as I feel as though that I can process them a little more. So
yeah, because they're 4 by 5.75 inches, 5 by 7 framed. And it was interesting because, like, you know, as we were going, because some of the, so for folks, just so there's clarity, there were alumni who submitted work to an open call, and then visiting lecturers that we invited to participate. And so when we went to begin to map out the works, I'm looking at this, I'm like, what is this work here? And it was like, but it's great because it's like, for me personally as a curator, it says a lot about an artist who can give you so much data and information and feeling and emotion and a, you know, concise space, right? And where the work is, it's next to Beverly's piece where she's also holding a doll. And so, you know, Robin and I were talking, and Robin, please chime in. We were thinking about, you know, just coping mechanisms that folks of color have to devise for themselves to just survive, And I think you've illustrated that was an impetus just even for these works. Robin, I don't know if you want to chime in on it with anything.
You hit it. Like, that's exactly what I was thinking about. So yeah, keep going.
And so do you plan to continue the series, or?
I definitely am slowly but surely continuing them as every time that I start upon another one, it feels like I'm digging a little bit deeper into the wound, a little bit deeper into the layer. And I've tried to incorporate not just my own imagery, but I took a lot of audio recordings and had a lot of conversations with people and talking about their understanding of their own sort of person of colorhood. So as they continue on, they start to incorporate more and more and more sort of narratives and stories and sort of counter narratives and counter mappings of people trying to figure out, like, fight, as Gene is saying, like trying to really fight this hegemonic, this really sort of monolithic understanding of that art history is specifically old European mastery instead of everything that is all the particulate matter that encompasses itself in it. So there are more, and they're constantly being added at a much faster rate than I'm used to working. So it's actually quite exciting.
Cool. So we'll have Paul chime in, and Robin, I want you to talk about your pieces, and then we'll open it up a little bit more because we got about 30 minutes. So Paul, where you at?
I'm right here. How you doing?
Hold on one second. Let me share my screen. I love this piece. And it's interesting because with Paul, I did a visit, and initially, because I've been in this headspace of like, we need to expand beyond the figure. And we initially talked about a more abstract landscape piece, and then I saw something from this series. And I've known Paul for a while. Most people know him through the picotage photographs, but they don't really know his painting practice. And so when I saw this piece beginning to incorporate that, I was like, oh man, we gotta do this. So I guess if you can talk a little bit about, this piece, why you decided to participate, and how do you feel this work kind of, I guess, melds within the larger conversation?
So I think in 2019, I lost 2 family members. And so I was coming off of that, looking forward to 2020. And I started off thinking, this is the year I'm going to travel around, go to all the Caribbean nations, experience them, and, bring that back from my lived experience to the studio. And I first started off with Barbados, Trinidad. And then after I came back from Trinidad, the pandemic started. I heard of things happening overseas. And then I tried to stay in the studio. And, after I made a multitude of things, I began going through my images from the previous year, trying to think about life and death. How, for me in Jamaica, death was kind of like omnipresent. You'd always hear about somebody passing. You'd always know somebody who knew somebody who passed. You always knew somebody who went to a grave digging or so on. There's always these little instances of death. And so knowing all that went on in 2020, I tried to keep hope alive in the studio and made work that celebrated life rather than being constantly bombarded with the news and into, if you know me, I don't really care for the news. I don't really, follow up on what's going on. I care about my initiative, what I'm going for. And so I initially made one of these works, which is based off of many other works that I've made over the years. And I was thinking a lot about Bob Thompson, the spiritual aspect of his figures in his works. And I was connecting that to the Paramin Blue Devils of Trinidad and how in some ways they're connected to the spirits. And the way how I make these images, I create them pretty dark. as if, you know, when I was a little kid, you always feel like there was always a presence around you at night. And I still feel this, and even like last fall, I was dreaming a lot about Jamaica. I remember telling my girlfriend, I was like, man, I just had 3 dreams in one. Like I would dream about, you know, events after events. And so like I started making these works, and I kind of work slowly on these items. And so I'd come back to the studio, I'd take a photo before I leave, and I came back, paint one figure blue, leave again, come back next day, I would dream. I would keep dreaming about like, what am I seeing? And so the first image was called, first work actually was called Midnight Blue 1. And I think I showed that to you, and you're like, what is that?
I think you were hiding it from me, which you normally do.
You know, you can't show everything. And so you're like, what is that? And I showed it to you. I showed you the final image, and you're like, I want that in the show. And I was like, all right, tell me the date, and I'll include it in the show, because I'm still planning on making more of these works and expanding, you know, think about expanding the scale and the figures, you know, think about dance, life, celebrating that. How do we choose to celebrate life? You know, I was thinking about like how, you know, before you're born, you're celebrated with a baby shower, right? Or there's a christening, and then you're not present at your baby shower, right? And then even after your death, you're still not consciously present at your funeral. You're only present in the physical. So these things are like always playing into my thoughts of like, how do we celebrate us? We can't celebrate before, we can't celebrate after, so we have to celebrate it now. And so that's how I look at these works, and just trying to like I'm still trying to understand them, you know, because even that image, a lot of the figures are sort of like created in Photoshop and cut and paste and mixed together to look like a fully formed figure. And these images are created from like a few different images that I take of my subjects, but there's a lot more behind them, and I'm still learning about what they are.
Can you quickly talk, before we go to Robin, talk about the process of combining now picotage and incorporating the painting practice?
Oh, definitely.
Slowly.
So picotage is something that I've been working on. And you know what, Larry? I actually created picotage at Anderson Ranch, where you are right now, about 2012.
That's poetic.
And so I was there doing a ceramic residency, and I started, you know, scratching into these photographs that I was printing in the print studio. And over the next year, they sort of like developed into these more organized pickings. And from there, you know, now I'm doing it at a much faster pace. It's time consuming. And I remember a number of years ago, you came by the studio, I think 2017, 2018. And we talked about picking different color paper or like painting over them. And I was like, no, you know, that will destroy the sort of picking quality that I was looking for. And I think before this, I was already picking at them or painting over the picked images. And so there was something, I feel like I was now more so ready to present them with the picking and the painting overlay, right? Because this was like, after I've done so many of them, I felt this sort of comfort, you know, even though I could have taken that risk many times, it takes a while to get to that point, and you sometimes can't rush it. So, and the picotage for me is thinking about scarification, body modifications, coming of age, and how do we sort of like mark ourselves as a coming of age theory, right? Do we get piercings or tattoos? Because that's what the law permits when we leave home and are now adults. And so like I pick at these as sort of like this sacrificial, I wouldn't say religious, but in a way to disguise my subjects. And I use various patterns, designs, and so forth that relates to either home or African patterns. And with this one, I was using the boule mask, which is a bit more gridded, the sundial mask. But you can't really see it, it's just like these things that I take from various parts of the diaspora. And so I try to paint more into this one, and I have one that I'm about to start working on, which I'm hoping to really fill out the next work with a lot more paint. So I'm trying to expand on that a bit more, because I'm still starting,
Cool. Thank you. So Robin, assistant curator and also participating artist.
Yes.
We're gonna pull up your pieces in the show because we wanted to make sure that there was a fair amount of sculpture. We were hoping to have some more, but as you know, with group shows, things happen.
Indeed.
But I guess if you can get, because you were telling me the backstory behind these, I guess if you can share with folks how these came to be, because like I know your work more from a figurative practice.
Yes.
In terms of 2D.
Yes. So I'm used to, and I haven't done them in a while, but I'm used to doing very large scale figure drawings on canvas, where I use, lots of bold lines, and I'm thinking about the body in motion. And so I started boxing back in 2016. And so toward the end of my first year at the academy, I started incorporating the boxers into my work. And it really did, thinking about how I was feeling as I was boxing, it was something that, I was allowing myself to, learn, make mistakes. I wasn't worrying about, being perfect. I just wanted to learn this new skill. And so in that, I was feeling a lot more confident in what I was doing. And I felt like almost like a different person, like I was meeting myself for the first time. And in doing that, I started to feel, because my first year felt very oh gosh, not uncomfortable, but insecure about the work that I was making in grad school. And I felt like, my voice wasn't really in it. But as I started thinking about how I was feeling in the boxing, as I started incorporating that in the work, my work started to take on something that was more genuinely me. And not only that, I was actually physically taking up space, because I have this tendency to, try to make myself smaller, whether I'm walking on the street, or I'm in the subway. I'll try to, make myself physically smaller. People are always asking me, talk louder, we can't hear you, So thinking about just those things, I was countering them so much in my work that it felt great. It felt like this is really me. And so I had a residency in West Palm Beach this last year, actually. And with the pandemic, it closed down early, and everything shut down. But before all of that happened, I started making these vessels. And these vessels felt like a natural next step in my practice. Like I'd always liked clay. I just didn't know, exactly how I wanted to mess with it. I'd done a few sculptures in grad school. But when I started hand building and making these vessels, they really were like an extension of me. And I did touch on it when we were doing our walk around for the opening of the show, how the vessels, like when I have a emotion, sometimes they get to be a little like a lot. And if we're being honest, actually 2018 to now in my life has been a wild ride. And so having all of these, you know, things that I'm feeling, didn't really know exactly how to express everything. It's like, put them in the vessel, whatever it is that I can't store because it's just too much for me, they go in the vessel. I've also had like ideas, what else do I want to create? And I've been thinking about, you know, what other vessels are there to create? What other things, you know, whether they be decanters, urns, like what other things do people make, and what do they contain, and what does that mean for me? And so I just want to make more of them. But with these two in particular, it was like toward the end of the residency. I didn't know it at the time, but you know, my time was winding down, and one of them I was trying to get ready for the show that we had in February actually of last year, and I didn't get it done, but you know, I was really trying to get it done in time. And then that's the one with the handles, and then the other one, literally like the day, it had to be fired before I could leave. Otherwise, I didn't know it was gonna happen. And the day that I knew that we were, that one, the day that I was told that we had to, you know, basically pack up and go, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because this thing really, it wasn't stable. It had to be fired at least one time. So the director of the ceramic studio, he was like, come back tomorrow, I'll have it for you. And so I went back. I literally, once it came out of the kiln, we had to let it cool for a second. I wrapped it in my hoodie, put it in my car, put the seatbelt over it, just so it, you know, I wouldn't mess it up, because it's like, how else am I supposed to, what am I supposed to do? You know, we didn't know that the place was going to be closing. We didn't know that we had to pack up so soon. We had like a couple of days to get out of there. And so for me, even that story of how these vessels came to be is so telling, why they're needed. You know, all of these feelings and emotions and the actions that were happening at the time, the uncertainty, the frustration, the pain, all of that went into not only creating the vessels, but at the end of it, that's where I store it. I can hold no more. Physically, I can't do it. So that's why I still feel compelled to make more of them. And I also feel compelled to make large drawings, just so I can keep telling myself, yes, take up space and watch that space, like just keep going, just expand even further. How far can I push it? You know, that's this question that I have for myself. So yeah.
And no, thank you all for sharing. So we've talked a bit about, I guess, more the presence component in terms of how each of you engage particular ideas related to your interest in your practice. But and whoever wants to chime in, I would love to hear more about the mechanics of the practice, you know, in terms of where you pull references, you know, when do you go into the studio, particularly, you know, this last year, you know, I've talked to some artists who, you know, really didn't get back into the studio until the summer because they just were so drained. Like Stephen Towns, I think he had a solo show in the fall and didn't start working on it until like June because he was physically, mentally, spiritually drained. And so I'd be curious to see how the mechanics of the practice work in this moment. How do you stay motivated in the studio? Because I know there are a lot of artists who are watching. And then also, where do you see the opportunities, particularly with institutions now, whether by hook or by crook, being forced to recalibrate how they engage with BIPOC artists and also staff? We saw what happened with the museum in Indianapolis, and where, like, you know, things are just we're not gonna let things slide anymore, and that there will be a confrontation. People will be called out. So two-part, like the mechanics of your practice, how do you kind of stay invigorated? And then on the other side, where do you see the opportunities not only for artists, but for cultural workers in whether it's educational institutions, exhibiting institutions, or other vehicles that maybe we haven't thought about. And anyone can chime in. Don't be shy.
I think for me, I kind of had a reverse situation with Stephen Towns. Is I got home and I felt I had just come hot off the residency. I felt like that. Oh wow! I finally broke my personal glass ceiling. I can keep going. But there was I was basically making a drawing a week, which for me I'm a very slow drafts person. I take my time sometimes to do the drawing 5, 6, 7 times until it feels as though what I'm trying to get at it has arrived. Not that I've manufactured it, but it has arrived through the process. So, but I've also learned the necessity and the beauty of rest. And when I'm spent, when the emotions are not flowing out from me anymore, and it feels like the valve is shut off, I can't tap it anymore. So I have to step back from the work. If it's telling me, if I have the umption to make the image, and then the image tells me to stop because whatever was driving it is no longer there, then I have to put it away and I have to put it down. But I think the thing, especially for a lot of younger POC artists, I'm still very early in my artistic journey, and I'm still very heavily in that emerging stage. I think the thing that's been shared upon, I've been talking to Robin and people of the groups of our, we have a BIPOC group chat with our alumni, and just talking to students too. I'm teaching at FIT this term. It's just that learning how to rest is so important that, I feel I used to have this feeling that like, if I'm not working at this second, then I'm falling behind. But slowly but surely learning that like, you can take a day off, you can take a week off, you can take some time to yourself if you're not helping the work by constantly working. As to the other question, I think square one, one of the most impactful ways that we can impact our institutions and our spaces is just to let more people speak. Who has a seat at the table is extremely important. I am the only Black faculty member currently in the fine art department at the Fashion Institute, and there is it's not wholly different, but the impetus of me speaking to my students, my classes are predominantly younger Black and brown students who can't see themselves in our historical canon. And I spend most of my time, I'm teaching drawing 1 and 2, but I spend most of my time trying to break down the sort of porcelain perception, like fragile sort of like porcelain scene perception of like, there is a history of non-European art. There is a history of makers, of people who have made things that look like you. And they have names. They're not anonymous people, as Gina's saying. They have a thriving history. And at some point in time, there was an interaction that stripped them or strip the agency for them to speak about their histories. So I spend most of my time showing images in the sort of art historical component of my classes, especially in the slide lecture portion. It's just like, okay, these are the people that, the Academy wants you, not the Academy, but the Academy, the Eternal Academy wants you to see. You get your Rubens, you get your Degas, you get your Delacroix, but what about your Kara Walker, your Carrie James Marshall? You keep constantly reaching back and going, no, there's another narrative going here. You see this, but here's someone else. You see this, but here's who has come, if you see it nowhere else, you're going to see it in my class. And I think that's sort of the stance that I have found that feels good in every space that I inhabit. If no one else is going to hear it, or if no one else is going to tell you, I'm going to make it my business to show you that there is another narrative that exists out there somewhere.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
I might continue that conversation. I remember in the spring when we had the shutdown and all of us went remote, it was really interesting to talk about our community and self-care, wellness, I think, and that has centered a lot about, it's not, when I was teaching, I was saying it's not really like art lessons now we're going to talk about, it's life lessons. And once we get to that point, it's like, this is post-school learning, which is even so necessary to bring in to the classroom curriculum. So we don't just make art, we're artists. How do we make artists, and that is around self-care. And just, so beautifully, Robin talks about taking space, and not being silenced, and how does that feel, So I think there's so much work around subjectivity and rest and sleep and hibernation, what that does for us, what we do in our dreams. I was like, that's the creative space where it gets worked out, So I felt like those conversations were really, really rich. And then of course, for me, like I would say opportunities, even during the pandemic, is that, I have a practice where public art can be another site, another place, engaging the public space. So when museums, galleries are closed, these are spaces, that are often very elitist, and so therefore, when we can put work in the public space for people, regular people, especially around the pandemic, it is providing art as a sanctuary, art as celebration and uplifting. And so I know, Larry, you've done great public projects right now, and I feel like those are much needed right now. It's solace, but it's also critical. It's also, pushing and prodding, everyone's on the public. We talk about the protests, like this is where the energy, as artists, we're many things, and we don't have to name them all, but, in our art can be activism, in our art can be, caring for the community, in our art can be, as you're doing, amplifying, curatorially. So I just think the public space is such a rich space to also work in. And I think that we often don't think about it because we aim to get to the white cube or to these institutions. And, guess what? Maybe it's not a horrible thing if institutions have to reevaluate everything, And again, I'm not one to destroy it. I actually just think, yeah, let's equalize it, meaning we don't have to destroy it, but let's minimize their funding, whereas let's maximize other communities that have no funding, So the disparity is what I feel like we just need to bring equity into that conversation, and certainly working with local artists and local communities, people of color. I mean, that's all great things that I think now is the charge, now is the impetus. And as we said, let us not forget 2020, even though all of us wish we could just kind of skip over that. I think there were so many amazing lessons that have shaped us and were forever changed. So I want to remember this in a serious way.
Dope. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? I want to be mindful of time. Thank you all for participating. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. If anyone else wants to chime in on this, if not, I wanted to piggyback your point, Jean. How do we hold institutions accountable, right? Because like what's happening now, you're seeing this backpedaling. And if we're talking about museums, they look at the collection, we're like, damn, we don't got nothing in here. Or like, I'm sure you all have gotten invites to said panel by said institution, or I look at particular galleries who I know do not have a history of showing POC artists, and all of a sudden that's all they're showing. And I'm trying to reconcile my feelings about it because I know it's an opportunity for the artists, but I also kind of some thing in me is like, this is a little, you're going for the money. And so I guess, how do we, or how have you, either whether you're working with a gallery or teaching someplace, hold wherever your place of work, business, whatever, accountable, potential partners accountable, so that you don't feel like they're trying to tokenize you. And this will be my last question. And anybody can jump in. Don't be
Just
shy.
become extremely unapologetic. Paul, please go.
You know, I think a lot of these institutions and galleries need the proper training or having the right staff, right? First, you got to start hiring Black people. It's Black History Month. Every day is Black History Month. And we have to like start hiring the correct people, start training the correct people, and, you know, have, I'm not employed. What's that? The HR office speak about these things, because, you know, there's a lot of talking that goes on, but there's no action being held, and the institutions and the people aren't being accountable for what they've said, what they've done, what they've shown. So there has to be sort of like a rigorous and continuous effort into fixing that. That's what I think. It's not going to happen overnight, you know.
No, definitely. I know that for sure.
America's race problem is not going to be fixed in 2100. It's not. It's going to continue on. America was never meant to be 14% Black. It was meant to be 90% white. That's what it was designed for.
Anyone else want to chime in? Thank you, Paul.
I was just gonna say, I do feel like it has a lot to do with infrastructure and how are you willing to take are you willing to take those steps? Are you willing to look at what your institution is right now and then take the necessary steps to revamp and bring in the people who need to be in there and, you know, change? Like, it's really about that. It's really about taking that sort of, and I'm not sure, like, for me personally, other than, you know, putting this idea out there for the Academy, like, but other than that, it's like, how would that mean, you know, how much space is being held for people of color, right? And I'm just, it's about that for me. It's about that infrastructure. It's about, as much as we can, to go in and make sure that the foundation is right in order for us to build something healthy on top of it. Because that, for America, that is the problem, you know, like, that the whole reason why we have the issues we have is because of the foundation. Like Paul was saying, it wasn't built for us. Therefore, we have to rebuild. We need a new foundation. And so that's been my mindset. It's like, I don't really know how, but I know that it needs to be that, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Eddie, you've been quiet, man. And Jean, I know you want to chime in too.
No, but Eddie, chime, please.
No, I was just listening to everyone. That's all. I mean, I think in relation to your question, I don't really need to say anything. I have opinion behind me, so it's pretty much speaks to itself about the answer to your question. I would like to add for the public that hasn't seen it, because we were just talking about it earlier, that is a demonstration in front of the Museum of Chinese in America in Chinatown. And in relation to PLC, I mean, I would imagine the Museum of Chinese in America has a foundation of having representation. And for whatever reason, you had an organization called the Chinatown Art Brigade include this space along with the new museum and other institutions, and on their displacement tour, their anti-gentrification tour. And they also included 50 Bowery Hotel, and started naming very affluent Chinese people or businessmen. Jonathan Chu was called out. So it wasn't so much as, this isn't a challenge of PLC strictly, it's also includes class and what wealth means, like what happens when people of color make it and what do they do within their own community. And I think that is a question that's currently being answered by organizations like the Chinatown Art Brigade, amongst others, led by Tommy Ari and Betty Yu, and among others. You know, so they were very gracious enough to let me walk with them on May 17th, 2019, the day of the Whitney opening, and I was on that displacement tour with them. And so that's why I've been going through that series. This is just one of many paintings that I'm currently working on in relation to that, and just showing my gratitude and really meditating on Larry's question, so to speak, in perpetuity, you know, and what to do. Even if the foundation is sound, it's something that has an economic concern that is going to be ongoing, because America, this is not just a global problem, but this is capitalism that we're dealing with here, and how wealth and prosperity works or lack of work for everyone. So yeah, I don't want to take too much space with, you could just, I think I've taken enough space as it is.
No, we appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then I guess, Jean, do you want to close it out with any thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say, Eddie, thank you so much for mentioning Tomiya Rai and Betty and the Chinatown Art Brigade, because I feel like part of this conversation, as we try to imagine the future, it's also that we're standing on many shoulders, and I am personally standing on Tomiya Rai's shoulder for sure, as an Asian American, and this kind of collective action for her to be transforming and being strategic, and has strategy and action behind it, and something at stake for not just their own voice, but so many other people who are voiceless, you know, and really who holds power, right? So these structural changes is like, you guys did this amazing show, and so hopefully, you know, with this show comes changing of policies, and that power shifts, you know, after a show like this, so that the next show doesn't just start from reset, but kind of learning from what a collaborative, you know, curator, and can there be future curators, and how much power you can have, and, you know, giving power to the artists and so on. So I think this is the notion of sharing those powers. You know, as we're talking about, like, there's so much behind the scene work, you know, of all those people who are, again, we can name them, but they are the people we're standing with, and have arrived, you know. So I know we're just, you know, these 6 squares, the whole show, there's so many people who've contributed beautiful work, you know. So that's, again, one of those things that we're talking about, being named and acknowledged for the work, whether you're featured or not, and to share space. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, thank you. And I think that's an important point. And that's something that Robin and I really kind of discuss, is to make sure that, you know, we're inclusive of all BIPOC communities, because I won't say it's easy, but it's just like, you know, I know for me, there's always going to be a skew towards, you know, African diaspora, Latinx, Asian, Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern, but making sure, for me, I make sure that that's part of the practice. You know, and so 9 times out of 10, I don't even need to explain it. You can read and see by the names, you know, the multiplicity of folks. But I think keeping that in the back of our minds, like I was watching the clip, I haven't watched it yet, Judas and the Messiah, with Fred Hampton talking about this rainbow coalition. And it was really him partnering with like working class white folks, and, you know, Latinx folks and LGBTQ folks that got the government scared. It wasn't what he was doing just in terms of the food program, but what happens when we all, you know, come together, you know, lift each other up. And so, Eddie, thank you for mentioning those folks that you collaborated with. I think using the platform to kind of highlight people who are doing the work, because most folks just want to do the work. They don't want any attention. But I think it's important to acknowledge folks who do the work every day, and, you know, do our best to work together. So I want to thank you all for participating in the exhibition. Thank you for your time, Eddie, Jean, Stephen, Paul, Robin. Thank you for collaborating to put together this exhibition based on your vision.
Yo, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you everybody. Like, this was, whew.
And the exhibition's on view until March 7th. I put a link in for the exhibition site. You can do a 3D tour, courtesy of Easel. So if you can't physically come see the show, you can virtually experience it. And again, thank you all for your time participating. Spread the word about the exhibition. And until we meet again, thank you, be well, stay healthy.
Thanks so much, Larry.
Larry, thanks, Robin. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Stop the recording. Stop the recording.